Picture this. You're on vacation, camera in hand, trying to get the perfect selfie. The location? Right next to those famous stoic guards in their red uniforms and tall black hats. They look like statues, completely motionless. Surely one little photo won't hurt, right? Maybe you can even get them to crack a smile or break character for just a second. What could possibly go wrong? Three American tourists visiting London in the summer of 2019, what started as an innocent attempt to capture vacation memories turned into an international incident that made headlines across 2 continents. Their story serves as a powerful reminder that some traditions are not meant to be tested, and some boundaries should never be crossed. This isn't just another tourist mishap story. This is about respect, consequences, and how a few moments of poor judgment can change everything. It's about real people who thought the rules didn't apply to them, and the ancient institution that proved them very, very wrong. Get ready for a story that will make you think twice before you ever approach a royal guard again. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of London as Marcus Thompson adjusted his camera strap for the 100th time that day. At 28, he considered himself a travel expert. His Instagram account boasted over 15,000 followers who eagerly awaited his adventure posts from around the world. Standing beside him were his college friends, Sarah Chun and David Rodriguez, both equally excited about their week-long European adventure. They had been planning this trip for 2 years, saving every penny from their office jobs back in Denver. London was their first stop, and they had already checked off Big Ben, the London Eye, and Tower Bridge from their must-see list. But there was one experience that Marcus had been looking forward to more than anything else: getting the perfect photo with the Queen's Guard at Buckingham Palace. The trio approached the palace gates with the enthusiasm of typical tourists. Sarah pulled out her phone to start filming everything for her social media stories, while David consulted their guidebook for interesting facts to share. The palace grounds were buzzing with visitors from every corner of the globe, all speaking different languages but united in their fascination with British royal tradition. As they walked closer to where the guard were stationed, Marcus noticed how perfectly still they stood. These weren't actors or performers, he realized. These were real soldiers, members of the British Army's elite regiments, trained to protect the royal family and maintained centuries-old traditions. Their red tunics were immaculate, their brass buttons gleaming in the morning light. The famous bearskin hats added an extra foot to their already impressive height, making them look like characters from a fairy tale. "Look at them," whispered Sarah, pointing her camera at the nearest guard. "They're like living statues. I bet they can't even see us properly with those huge hats." David laughed quietly. "I read that those hats weigh about 2 pounds and are made from real bear fur. Can you imagine wearing that in this heat?" Marcus was already thinking about angles and lighting. He had seen countless tourist photos with these guards, but most of them were boring, predictable shots. He wanted something different, something that would make his followers stop scrolling and really pay attention. The guard standing closest to them was particularly impressive, probably in his early 30s, with a stern expression that seemed carved from stone. "Watch this," Marcus said, walking confidently toward the guard. "I'm going to get right up close for a dramatic shot." Sarah and David exchanged glances. They had seen their friend's bold approach to travel photography before, but something about this situation felt different. The guards weren't tourist attractions, despite what many visitors seemed to think. They were working soldiers with a serious job to do. Marcus positioned himself just a few feet away from the guard and started taking photos. The soldier remained perfectly still, staring straight ahead as if Marcus didn't exist. Encouraged by what he interpreted as permission, Marcus moved closer. Then closer still. "Get one of me pretending to march with him," Marcus called out to Sarah, who reluctantly raised her phone to record. That's when Marcus made his first mistake. He began mimicking the guard's posture, standing rigidly at attention right beside him. Other tourists stopped to watch, some laughing at the impromptu performance. Marcus was enjoying the attention, completely unaware that the guard's jaw had tightened almost imperceptibly. "This is gold," Marcus muttered to himself, then had what he thought was a brilliant idea. He started mimicking the guard's movements, copying the way he held his rifle, and even attempting to match his facial expression. The crowd of onlookers grew larger, with many pulling out their own cameras to capture the American tourist's antics. David felt a growing sense of unease. He had noticed that other guards in the area had turned their attention toward their location. Their expressions hadn't changed, but there was something in their posture that suggested they were very much aware of what was happening. "Marcus," David called out quietly, "maybe we should move on to the next spot." But Marcus was too caught up in his performance to listen. He had noticed that his audience was growing, and his photographer's instincts told him he was onto something special. He moved even closer to the guard, now standing practically shoulder to shoulder with him. Sarah lowered her phone, suddenly feeling uncomfortable. "Guys, I think we should respect their space. These aren't street performers." Her words fell on deaf ears. Marcus had spotted something that made his photographer's heart race: the perfect lighting. The sun had shifted just enough to create a dramatic contrast between light and shadow across the palace courtyard. If he could just get one more shot, maybe from a slightly different angle. He reached out to steady himself against the guard's shoulder for the perfect pose. The moment Marcus's hand made contact with the red tunic, everything changed. The guard's head snapped toward him with military precision, his eyes locking onto Marcus's with an intensity that made the young tourist's breath catch in his throat. For the first time since arriving at the palace, Marcus realized he might have made a serious mistake. The guard's voice, when it came, was loud enough to be heard clearly across the courtyard, but controlled enough to demonstrate his professional training. "Step back immediately and do not touch the guard." The command wasn't a request or a suggestion. It was an order delivered with the authority of someone who was used to being obeyed without question. Marcus stumbled backward, his camera nearly slipping from his suddenly sweaty hands. But the damage was already done. Other guards hadn't noticed the disturbance, and Marcus could see them adjusting their positions slightly. The tourists who had been watching and laughing just moments before were now stepping away, sensing that the mood had shifted dramatically. Sarah grabbed David's arm. "We need to get him out of here. Now." However, Marcus, still not fully grasping the severity of the situation, made his second mistake. Instead of apologizing and walking away, he raised his hands in what he thought was a gesture of peace and said, "Hey man, relax. I was just trying to get a cool photo. No harm done, right?" The guard's expression didn't change, but something in his stance suggested that Marcus had just made things significantly worse. In the background, Sarah noticed that a palace security officer was walking in their direction, speaking quietly into his radio. David finally managed to grab Marcus's arm. "We're leaving. Right now." But as they started to walk away, Marcus couldn't resist looking back over his shoulder at the guard. Their eyes met one final time, and Marcus saw something there that made him realize this encounter was far from over. The guard's expression wasn't angry or frustrated. It was patient, watchful, and completely professional. Somehow, that was more unsettling than any display of emotion would have been. As they hurried away from the palace gates, none of the three friends could have imagined that their tourist adventure was about to become an international incident. They thought they were putting an embarrassing moment behind them, but in reality, they had just triggered a chain of events that would follow them for the rest of their trip and beyond. The ancient wheels of royal protocol had begun to turn, and Marcus Thompson from Denver was about to learn just how seriously the British take their traditions. What had started as a quest for the perfect vacation photo was about to become a very public lesson in respect, consequences, and the power of institutions that have survived for centuries by never backing down. The guard remained at his post, as motionless as before, but now he carried with him the memory of 3 tourists who had crossed a line that most visitors never even knew existed. And in the complex network of security and protocol that protects the British royal family, memories like that are never forgotten. The afternoon found Marcus, Sarah, and David sitting in a crowded pub near their hotel, trying to make sense of what had happened at the palace. Marcus had uploaded the photos and videos to his Instagram account, adding captions like, "When in London, respect the guards," and close encounter with British tradition. The posts were already getting likes and comments from his followers, who thought the whole thing was hilarious. "See? No big deal," Marcus said, scrolling through the positive responses on his phone. "People love this stuff. I might have actually helped tourism." Sarah wasn't convinced. She had been thinking about the security officer she'd seen approaching them and the way the other guards had seemed to coordinate their attention on their little group. "I don't think they saw it as helping anything, Marcus. Those guards take their job seriously." David nodded, taking a sip of his beer. "My cousin served in the military. He always said that traditions like this exist for real reasons, not just for show. We probably crossed some lines we didn't even know existed." But Marcus was feeling confident again, surrounded by the comfortable chaos of tourist life in London. The pub was full of other American visitors sharing their own stories of cultural misunderstandings and funny moments. It was easy to believe that their encounter at the palace was just another amusing travel story. That confidence lasted exactly until they returned to their hotel. The desk clerk, a polite young woman with a distinctly nervous expression, approached them as soon as they entered the lobby. "Mr. Thompson, there are some gentlemen here who would like to speak with you." Marcus looked around and saw two men in dark suits standing near the hotel's seating area. They weren't police, but they carried themselves with the unmistakable authority of law enforcement. One was older, probably in his 50s, with graying hair and the kind of calm demeanor that suggested he'd seen everything before. The younger one looked like he might have military experience, standing with perfect posture and alert eyes that missed nothing. "Marcus Thompson?" the older man asked, approaching with a polite but serious expression. "I'm Inspector Harrison from the Metropolitan Police. This is Sergeant Walsh. We'd like to have a word with you about your visit to Buckingham Palace today." Sarah felt her stomach drop. This was exactly what she had been worried about. David stepped closer to his friends, already thinking about whether they needed to call the American embassy. Marcus, however, still hadn't grasped the full significance of the situation. "Is this about the photos? Because I didn't break any laws. I checked before we went. Photography is allowed in public areas." Inspector Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, Mr. Thompson, photography is indeed allowed. However, physical contact with on-duty guards is a different matter entirely. We have reports of inappropriate behavior that we need to discuss." The word inappropriate hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had touched the guard's shoulder for maybe 2 seconds, barely making contact. How could that possibly be considered inappropriate behavior? "Can we speak somewhere more private?" Sergeant Walsh suggested, glancing around the busy hotel lobby. They found themselves in a small conference room off the main lobby, sitting across from two representatives of British law enforcement who clearly took this matter much more seriously than Marcus had imagined possible. Inspector Harrison opened a tablet and showed them several photographs that made Marcus's heart sink. The images were security camera shots from the palace, showing the entire encounter from multiple angles. Marcus could see himself mimicking the guard, moving progressively closer, and, finally, reaching out to touch the soldier's uniform. From this perspective, the progression looked much more deliberate and disrespectful than it had felt in the moment. "The Queen's Guard are not performers, Mr. Thompson," Inspector Harrison explained in a measured tone. "They are active-duty soldiers carrying out official duties. Physical interference with their duties is taken very seriously by both the military and civilian authorities." Sarah spoke up for the first time. "Officer, Inspector, what exactly does this mean? Are we in trouble?" Sergeant Walsh leaned forward slightly. "That depends largely on Mr. Thompson's willingness to cooperate and demonstrate understanding of why this behavior is unacceptable." Marcus was beginning to feel the first real stirrings of panic. Cooperate with what? I mean, I'm sorry if I offended anyone, but this seems like a huge overreaction to a tourist mistake. The room fell silent for a moment. Inspector Harrison studied Marcus carefully, as if trying to assess whether the young American truly understood the gravity of the situation or was simply trying to minimize his actions. "Mr. Thompson, let me explain something that might not be immediately obvious to visitors," the inspector began. "The Queen's Guard aren't just ceremonial figures. They're trained soldiers, often veterans of active combat, who are responsible for the security of the royal family and royal residences. When someone approaches them aggressively or makes unexpected physical contact, it triggers serious security protocols. You pause to let this information sink in. Your actions today required a security assessment, a review of all surveillance footage, and coordination between multiple agencies. The guard you touched had to file an incident report. His commanding officer had to be notified. Palace security had to review their procedures. What seemed like a harmless moment to you created hours of additional work for dozens of people. David felt compelled to defend his friend, even though he was beginning to understand how serious this had become. Inspector, Marcus didn't mean any disrespect. He's actually a big supporter of military traditions. He just got caught up in the excitement of being in London. Intentions matter, Mr. Rodriguez, Sergeant Walsh replied, but so do actions and their consequences. The guard who was touched today will remember this incident for the rest of his career. It becomes part of his official record. That's not something we take lightly. Marcus was starting to understand that this wasn't going to be resolved with a simple apology and a promise to be more careful in the future. What happens now? Am I going to be arrested? Inspector Harrison consulted his notes. You're not under arrest at this time, Mr. Thompson. However, there are several factors we need to consider. First, your social media posts about the incident. We understand you've shared videos and photos of the encounter online. Marcus's phone suddenly felt very heavy in his pocket. He had been so proud of those posts just a few hours earlier. Now, they felt like evidence of his poor judgment. We're going to need you to remove those posts, Sergeant Walsh continued. Additionally, you'll need to sign an agreement acknowledging that you understand the seriousness of interfering with royal guards and commit to not repeating this behavior. And if I refuse? Marcus asked, though he was already certain he wouldn't. Then we move forward with formal charges for interfering with military personnel in the execution of their duties. Inspector Harrison replied matter-of-factly. That's a criminal offense that could result in fines, legal proceedings, and a permanent record that might affect your ability to visit the UK in the future. The weight of potential consequences was finally sinking in. Marcus realized that what had felt like harmless tourist fun could actually affect his job, his travel plans, and his future in ways he had never considered. His employer conducted background checks for promotions, and a criminal record in a foreign country would definitely complicate his career prospects. Sarah watched her friend's face as the reality of the situation became clear to him. She could see him processing not just the immediate consequences, but also the ripple effects this could have on his life back home. I'll remove the posts, Marcus said quietly, and I'll sign whatever agreement you need me to sign. I honestly didn't realize how serious this was. Inspector Harrison's expression softened slightly. Mr. Thompson, we understand that cultural differences can lead to misunderstandings. The goal here isn't to ruin your vacation or your life. It's to ensure that you understand the importance of respecting British institutions and the people who serve them. As they worked through the paperwork, Marcus couldn't help but think about how quickly everything had changed. That morning, he had been a confident traveler looking forward to sharing exciting content with his followers. Now, he was sitting across from police officers, signing legal documents, and facing the possibility of being banned from returning to a country he had always wanted to explore more thoroughly. The incident was becoming a turning point, not just for their vacation, but for how Marcus understood his role as a visitor in someone else's country. The lesson was expensive, embarrassing, and completely unexpected, but it was also undeniably real. By the time they left the conference room, the three friends knew that their London adventure had become something none of them would ever forget. But they also knew that the story was far from over. The real test would be whether Marcus could learn from this experience and show that he truly understood why his actions had been so problematic. The next morning brought an unexpected development that would change everything for Marcus Thompson and his friends. Inspector Harrison called their hotel room early, his voice carrying a tone that Marcus couldn't quite read. Mr. Thompson, we've had an interesting development in your case. The guardsman involved in yesterday's incident has requested to meet with you. Marcus nearly dropped the phone. Meet with me? Why would I want to do that? Guardsman Williams has served 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq before joining the Queen's Guard, the inspector explained. He's asked to speak with you personally about why yesterday's incident was problematic. It's not a requirement, but it might help you understand the situation from his perspective. Sarah and David watched their friend's face as he processed this information. The idea of facing the guard he had disrespected was both terrifying and intriguing. 2 hours later, they found themselves in a small meeting room at a military facility not far from their hotel. Guardsman Williams entered wearing civilian clothes, and Marcus was surprised to see that he looked younger than he had appeared in his formal uniform. Maybe 32 or 33, with the kind of bearing that spoke of extensive military experience. "Mr. Thompson," the guardsman said, extending his hand for a handshake. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting." Marcus shook his hand, noting the firm grip and direct eye contact. "I owe you an apology, sir. I didn't realize how inappropriate my actions were." Guardsman Williams nodded and sat down across from them. "I appreciate that, but I wanted to talk with you about more than just apologies. I think there's a story here that might help other tourists understand what we do and why it matters." Over the next hour, Guardsman Williams shared his perspective in a way that was both educational and deeply personal. He explained that the Queen's Guard isn't just a tourist attraction or a quaint tradition. These are active soldiers who have often served in combat zones before being selected for this prestigious assignment. "When I'm standing guard at the palace," he explained, "I'm not just there for show. I'm responsible for the security of one of the world's most important buildings. My training, my awareness, my ability to respond to threats, all of that depends on maintaining complete focus and discipline." He told them about the selection process for the Queen's Guard, which required not only military excellence, but also the ability to maintain composure under any circumstances. "The guards deal with tourists every day," he explained, "and most visitors are respectful and understanding of boundaries. But when someone breaks that boundary, like you did yesterday, it creates a ripple effect," Guardsman Williams continued. "I have to file a report. My commanding officer has to assess whether I handled the situation properly. The entire security protocol gets reviewed to see if there were any vulnerabilities exposed." Marcus was beginning to understand the complexity of what he had triggered with his seemingly innocent actions. "I never thought about all the people who would be affected by what I did." "Most people don't," the guardsman replied. "And that's actually part of the problem. Social media has created this culture where people think everything is content. Everything is available for their entertainment. But some things are bigger than individual entertainment." Sarah found herself genuinely fascinated by this perspective. "Do you mind if I ask what it's like to stand there while tourists take photos and sometimes act disrespectfully?" Guardsman Williams considered the question carefully. "It's part of the job, and honestly, most tourists are wonderful. They're excited to be in London, they're respectful, and they understand that we're real people doing a real job. The problems come when people start to see us as props rather than as soldiers." He shared stories of other incidents he had witnessed during his time with the Queen's Guard. Tourists who had tried to make guards laugh, people who had attempted to place objects on guards or near them for photos, and individuals who had become aggressive when guards didn't respond to their interactions. "The thing is," he explained, "our job requires us to be completely professional at all times. We can't break character to explain boundaries to every person who approaches us inappropriately. That's why the response to incidents like yesterday's seems so formal and serious. It's the only way to maintain the standards that this position requires." David had been listening intently and finally asked the question that had been bothering him. What would have happened if Marcus hadn't cooperated with the police? What if he had refused to remove the social media posts or sign the agreement? Then it would have become a criminal matter, Guardsman Williams replied frankly. And that would have been unfortunate for everyone involved. The goal is never to ruin someone's life over a cultural misunderstanding. But we also can't allow people to think that interfering with royal security is acceptable behavior. The conversation took an unexpected turn when Guardsman Williams asked Marcus about his background and his interest in photography. As Marcus explained his passion for capturing unique travel experiences, the guardsman offered a perspective that none of them had considered. There are ways to photograph and interact with British traditions that are both respectful and compelling, he said. If you're genuinely interested in telling the story of the Queen's Guard, there are proper channels for that. Journalists and documentarians work with us regularly to create content that educates people about our role and history. This opened up a conversation about responsible travel photography and the difference between exploitation and education. Marcus found himself thinking about his social media presence in a completely new way. I think I've been approaching travel photography all wrong, he admitted. I've been so focused on getting unique content that I forgot about respecting the subjects of my photos. Guardsman Williams smiled for the first time during their meeting. That's exactly the kind of insight I was hoping you'd reach. The fact that you can recognize that tells me you've learned something valuable from this experience. As their conversation wound down, the guardsman made an offer that surprised everyone in the room. Mr. Thompson, if you're interested, I can arrange for you to observe a changing of the guard ceremony from a special viewing area. You'll be able to see the precision and tradition involved in what we do, and you could take photographs from a respectful distance. Marcus was genuinely moved by the offer. After everything that had happened, the fact that this soldier was willing to extend such courtesy spoke volumes about his character and professionalism. They spent the rest of their time in London experiencing the city with a completely different perspective. Marcus did attend the changing of the guard ceremony, and the photos he took were some of the most meaningful of his entire trip. Instead of focusing on getting himself into the shots, he captured the dignity and precision of the ceremony itself. When they returned to Denver, Marcus wrote a long blog post about their experience. Instead of portraying himself as a victim of British bureaucracy, he honestly described his mistakes and the lessons he had learned. The post went viral, not because of the drama, but because of his honest reflection on cultural respect and responsible tourism. The story resonated with other travelers who had found themselves in similar situations, and Marcus began receiving messages from people who had their own stories of cultural misunderstandings abroad. He realized that his experience, while embarrassing and stressful at the time, had given him a platform to discuss important issues about travel, respect, and personal responsibility. 6 months later, Marcus received an unexpected email from Guardsman Williams. The soldier was retiring from active duty and had been asked to speak at a tourism conference about interactions between military traditions and visitors. He invited Marcus to join him as a co-speaker, sharing the tourist perspective on their encounter. The conference presentation was a success, and it led to Marcus being invited to write articles about responsible travel for several publications. His photography style evolved to focus on capturing the essence of places and traditions without inserting himself into situations where he didn't belong. Looking back on their London trip, all three friends agreed that the incident with the Royal Guard had been one of the most educational experiences of their lives. It had taught them about respect, consequences, and the importance of understanding the cultural context of the places they visit. Marcus kept in touch with Guardsman Williams, who became an unexpected friend and mentor. Their initial confrontation had evolved into a mutual respect that neither of them could have predicted. The lesson that Marcus carried forward was simple but profound. Every place you visit as a tourist is someone else's home, workplace, and sacred space. The goal of travel should be to learn and appreciate, not to exploit or disrespect for the sake of entertainment. Years later, when Marcus looked at the photos from that changing of the guard ceremony, he remembered not the embarrassment of his mistake, but the grace with which Guardsman Williams had helped him understand a better way to see the world. It was, he often reflected, the most valuable souvenir he had ever brought home from a trip. The story of the tourists who crossed the Royal Guard had become something much more meaningful than a cautionary tale about cultural boundaries. It had become a story about growth, understanding, and the unexpected connections that can form when people are willing to learn from their mistakes and treat each other with dignity and respect.